Hello, I'm David Hunt and welcome to The Art Hunter. What's a composer? What's the meaning? It's a person that writes music, either professional or for the love of music. Our guest today is a professional and he loves the music. He's Melbourne born but London based, is a multi-award winning composer who has worked with some of the world's best cabaret artists, opera, jazz, classical artists, overachiever. Authored 8 original operas, 10 musicals, 13 children's musicals, and has recorded 25 albums. Too much, I say, too much. We're going to find out so much about him later on. Oh, we're not stopping there. He's composed for the Royal Shakespeare Company, as well as Woody Allen in New York City. So what is London Beat? Well, we're going to find out, but it's a weekly art show. And what is Night of Broken Glass? It's a socially inclusive performance. Let's meet him. Let's talk about it all. Warren Wills, hello.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me on. And in this den of iniquity that Dan has created for us in Victoria, I'm just happy to be out and about. Very nice.
Yes, and legally we can do this. So, look
I'm
at
over
that.
18.
You're over 18?
Yep.
And say no more. All right, where did it start? You know, like you're obviously an amazing musician and composer. When did you start to learn piano? At what age? Or was it piano?
It was piano. And in fact, the trajectory of my life was in a way, I'm not going to say preordained, but I'm compelled to do what I do. When I was 4, I would go to my grandfather's place in Footscray,
right,
which was quite an ordeal. Then it's improved remarkably well since then. But back in the day, and we used to go over there, it was one hell of a trip. I get there, and he would love to pull out, it was an album of Chopin music played by Vladimir Perly-Musa. I was enchanted. I was spellbound. It was magical.
At 4?
At 4.
Wow.
At that point, I used to get the animals out, used to put them on the piano and give them lessons. I used to get manuscript paper without even knowing about notation, just for the calligraphy of it, and just write bizarre things and say that's a composition. And I was compelled. I loved it. That was it. I went through all my grades, theory. Then when I was 10, my mother, who was an opera teacher, thought, what are we going to do with him? She couldn't work out what to do with me because I'd kind of finished my grades in theory. So we went along to Melbourne University, and there was a guy there teaching composition named John McCackey, who went on to be Dean of Music at Troupe University. Right. And I remember I was sitting there 10 years old, and it was Saturday at the Conservatorium, and he said, I'll think about taking for composition. He said, all right, like smart one. He said, can you improvise in B-flat major for me? Off I went. He said, I'll take him. And do you know, it was one of the high points, one of the fondest memories of my life was every Saturday going to the Conservatorium, playing on harpsichords, claviers, pianos with John McCackey doing composition. Yeah. And even things that he told me were so magical. It was like, there's a particular point in Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata where they actually hit a D natural. He said, that's a Neapolitan 6. Oh, wow! As a kid, it was like, this is the most exciting thing ever. That degree, I've got to tell you, this is that for me, that degree of excitement and joy, you would think would wear after a while. Yeah. But once I got into things like music theatre and started to work with different cultures, started to work with flamenco artists, started to work with zarzuela, with fado, with Middle Eastern musicians like Ilham Ahmadfai, it was a great way to keep it alive. But where I am now, particularly, I find the discipline, the genre with music theatre. So you're working with producers, choreographers, you're working with designers and directors and writers and actors, musicians. What more can you want? It's a magical mystery tour. Yeah.
So, okay, you finished your degree. What did you do when you first left the studies behind?
Well, it didn't that wasn't the sequence of events in a way. I was 16 when I lied and said I was 18 and got a job teaching composition for the government based out of Canberra, and they had these summer music courses and I lied about it, and I used to love doing that. And then I got a job when I was 18 here in Melbourne. You might remember them back in the day, for anyone who's old enough, called the Mushroom Theatre Troupe. Yeah. And the Mushroom Theatre Troupe, we used to travel around, and I remember the first musical we did was based on Aviators, Charles Kingsford Smith, Nancy Bird. Right. And that was it. I was a convert. Once I kind of got into that, I then got a one-way ticket to the Middle East, and then one thing led to the other. But I hadn't completed my studies. I went back. I did a postgraduate fellowship degree at London College of Music. I did a Masters of Music in Composition at Goldsmiths College. So I kind of feel that being a student of music is an ongoing thing, degree or not. I mean, you know. And the other thing which is really important to say, which I didn't anticipate as a kid, the great thing about music is it totally transcends borders, language, and politics.
Yeah.
So I found myself in Riyadh, where under Sharia law, for example, music's illegal. But I've been doing concerts there at the French Embassy as the token white male Western Jew because of music. Now, what a great way to see the world and travel the world.
Oh, absolutely. And that is one of the great things about and classical music and musical theatre is you do travel the world. You know, like you can go off. So why did you end up settling in England? You do come back on a regular basis, and you're stuck here now because of COVID. Right. Or have you run away from the family because it's a nice chance to get away? Oh no, I've got to stay in Australia.
Well, the first thing is my mum's a Brummie. She was a Brummie, bless her, and she was an opera teacher. So I'm very lucky to have an Australian passport that doubles as a British passport. Brilliant. It's got a stamp of permanent right of abode. Okay. So it's a great base. Listen, unlike Australia, you're in Melbourne and you got to get a tour. Great. So you go to Bendigo and you go to Adelaide. I mean, the great thing about, of course, if you're in London, the phone rings to go to Berlin, or the phone rings to go to Paris, or even recently for me to go to places like Riyadh, Sharjah, Dubai, Amman. It's 3 or 4 hours away. It's not a big deal. Yep. So it was a great place to cut my teeth. And certainly as a composer in music theatre, there are really only the two places in the world you're going to cut your teeth, and that's New York and London. And both, for me, in a way, I'm kind of very happy and well served in. Yeah.
Right, okay. Let's talk about you as a musician and composer. Warren, how hard is it for you to compose, or do you find it unbelievably easy as a composer?
I've never had a problem with it. But it needs to quantify. There's certain things to go with it. Yeah. I always say if a lyric is good, and I've worked with Stu Wilson, John Farndon, Woody Allen, Margaret Atwood, I've worked with them all. When you get a lyric that is really good, it writes itself musically. Yeah. If I'm struggling for it, experience has told me generally it's not that I've got writer's block. It's not that it doesn't. Whether it's the scansion, whatever it is, a great lyric. For example, we're doing a musical currently about an Australian vigilante. Whatever, a guy called Chopper Reed, who I got to know quite well, and a guy called Frank Howson actually did the lyrics, and put one lyric in front of it. It was called, I think You Were the One, and it's Chopper singing to his partner, right? He put it in front of me, and I just busted it, press record, and that's it. That was a song. Wow. And I genuinely believe that if a lyric is good enough and strong enough, it virtually writes itself. Wow. We also had another similar fortuitous situation like that with a song called Take My Hand. And it was Elvis Presley singing this in an Elvis musical, which was supposed to be on in London at the Other Palace in November last year, but you know the story, very sad. Anyway, it'll come back. And that was another one that wrote. So I've never had a problem. It's never been a writer's block. Yes, occasionally you kind of think you really have to work for things. Yeah. I had such a good schooling. I had an opera company with Christina Jones, who writes a lot for the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Royal Opera House in London. We did what I call boutique operas. They were for 5 or 6 women primarily, and we did 8 original ones, and we won Best Musical in London in 1992. We got the Carling London Best Musical Award for Pimani Opera, which is nice. But it was so great to where you got, I mean, what could be nicer way to spend a day? You've got a fantastic script, you've got these fantastic characters. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to set the whole thing to music. I mean, tough life, isn't it, really?
Well, but you obviously are very good at what you do. There would have been people that would struggle in that situation. And, you know, like, it's the quality of your mind and your ability that you're a 4-year-old kid and you were sitting there at that piano in Footscray, you know, like with the animals on top.
Listen, don't get me wrong. I am very, very grateful for the fact that for me it was never work. It's always been a passion. So although today, okay, if you said to me, are you going to go home and compose? I don't. If I'm commissioned, I do. Do I do it spontaneously for my own enjoyment? I don't. That doesn't mean I like it less, if that makes sense. But what I found, I'm mindful of the fact I've never really had to work very hard for it, because if you love something and it's an obsession, an addiction, a hobby, whatever you want to call it, well, it's more than a hobby. I mean, it's an obsession. Yeah. So it's never been work for me. Yeah. So I get it. A lot of kids have to work very hard, and they do their scales or they do their composition. it was never like that for me.
So here you are, you've got some great lyrics and a great story, and we've got to talk about Chopper again a little bit later. Do you, if you're sitting on a plane, or if you're, like go to bed, do you wake up and think, oh, I've got it? Or are you one of those people that sit in front of that piano and that's where it comes out? It's not while you're wandering the streets?
All the above.
All the above.
Oh yeah, I've had dreams where I've woken up and had to write it all down because the whole thing's unravelled in my head during a dream. I've had it where I've been on planes and finished the whole thing, or I've done it at the piano. All of the above. Yeah.
And what happens if you're in a situation where you don't have a pen and paper? Can you retain what you've thought about?
I've got tricks now to force myself to do retention exercises because I don't want to forget it. So I make recordings. So I work out what key it's going to be and I work out what it is, and I will actually visualise the notation. Yeah, I've got certain tricks to make it work.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Chopper. Let's talk about that. How did you get to know him?
Okay. Just to backtrack to get into the Chopper thing, again, I came over here not with any great thing, but mainly because my mother was very ill. So I found there was a phase about 2012, so yeah, about 10 years ago. And I come out of a very strange period of lots of travelling. We're doing lots of stuff in New York. I've been doing a lot of stuff with Pamela Anderson in London at the time. We just started this whole thing of doing what I call socially inclusive music theatre. Anyway, one of the pieces that I had on in London, I wanted to do something that would genuinely bring different communities together. And I did a thing called Genesis to Broadway. We did it what was then called the Shaw Theatre in Euston, King's Cross. And came over here and I was told, let's get it on here. And we did it chapel off chapel. And we had some fabulous people. Fen Belling was involved and a few other people. It was fabulous. Okay. During that time, the writer, who was Frank House, and he said, Chopper's here. I said, who's Chopper? He said, there's a bloke, he's sitting out there, he's got no ears, he's got sunglasses. And I thought, how the hell do you balance sunglasses? You got no... Anyway, cutting a long story short, I got to understand the myth and the legend that was Chopper.
Yep.
One of the things that drew me to the story immediately was the New York Times, in their health section, had run a page story about Chopper Read because he was Australia's best-selling crime author worldwide at the time. And I thought, Shane Warne doesn't even get a full page New York Times health section.
Yep.
I thought, who is this Chopper? Whatever we do, clearly this would have legs abroad. And indeed, the Chopper film that launched Eric Barner's career also did quite well in the States and other places. So anyway, we got to meet Chopper. What a guy. What a guy. Interesting dental work, interesting behind the ear, well, no ear work. Vincent van Gogh only lost the one ear.
Yes.
Okay, Chopper, take a bow. But what a raconteur, what a wit, what a funny guy, and what a dangerous guy, obviously.
And an artist as well. He
was an artist. But not only that, it was interesting. We say he was very witty about it, but there was a genuine and a tender side to him. I wouldn't say he became a redemptive character, but he was certainly a reformed character.
Okay.
And he liked his writing, he liked his art, he adored his son, who he taught drums to and everything. I don't think he was someone who lived in the world of regrets. That's why I'm saying I don't think he was ever someone who suffered from pangs of remorse about what he did. But he was certainly a reformed character, and in fact so much so at the time of his death, he was told that if he didn't have a liver transplant, his death was inevitable. And he said there were far more worthy recipients for a good liver than he was, and he was prepared to take a tumble.
Whoa.
Yeah. And he did indeed take a tumble.
So where did the musical come along? How did this happen?
We had some, it was Frank House and myself and Chopper Read. We had lots of conversations. The story of his life cries out to be a musical. Funnily enough, we did the launch of the musical at a prison, the old Melbourne jail, and it's, oh my God, is it King Street?
Oh yeah.
I'm pointing like that, like I know what I mean. Anyway, we did it in there, and every newspaper, every publication turned up, and we did some interviews with us afterwards.
Yep.
My God, the questions we were asked, it was like, how can you promote violence like that? And I say, do you watch The Sopranos? Yeah. Have you ever watched a musical called Les Miserables? A lot of people died in the French Revolution, a lot more than Chopper actually killed. And they said, why do it about such a violent character? And I said, well, and this is quite truthful. If I honestly believed that doing a musical about Mahatma Gandhi would put bums on seats, I would. The truth of the matter is, it's a fascinating trajectory to have a character who was abused and tortured as he was by his gun-toting father and his neurotic Bible-wielding mother, who went through the phases that he went through, who became as disturbed and violent. He was a one-man vigilante outfit, as violent and screwy as you like, who then had this, the trajectory goes on, who had this kind of reformation, a reformed character. It's a fascinating story, but also exposes so much more about crime and hypocrisy. I suppose in the same way Chicago, as a musical, has a fantastic look, not so much at the characters who are murdered, but the system that allows this to happen and turns them into celebrities and so on. I find interesting, for example, people look at Ned Kelly in this country, who is lauded as some kind of hero. This man was a police killer.
Absolutely.
Chopper wasn't anything like that. Chopper, putting it nicely, Chopper would go after the other scum in the sea that he lived in. He wouldn't go after you or me. It was of no interest to him. Ned Kelly had a slightly different agenda. So that in a lot of ways, and I can also see, in the last 5 or 10 years, is it Tony Mockbell, and there's a few others here. Australia seems to have some kind of bizarre fascination for this underbelly.
Hold on. London is full of...
No, really?
It's really,
Listen, London's one of the few countries in the world you can actually go and personally witness the demonstration of torture. Let's all go to the London dungeons and see how people were drawn and quartered. How outrageous is that?
Yeah, exactly.
But,
you're so busy with all the music that you're involved in, and then all of a sudden comes along this thing called London Beat. What's London Beat?
London Beat is my excuse, really, for going to see lots of pals do what they do in London. When you work in a business, a lot of people say, you're a composer, musical director, you know so-and-so. And I say, I know them, but I never, ever see their work because I'm always doing it myself, right? And it's true, as a musical director, it's very difficult to get a handle on what other people do, or even as composers, because you're out there on a nightly, doing your own thing. London Beat gave me a legitimate excuse to go and see as many shows as I like and review them. So most of the people, I'd say 80% of the people are reviewing are my friends, because I know quite a few people in the business.
And where do you review them? Is it on? Is it a newspaper? Or
I'll tell you exactly how it works. Okay, London Beat is for a radio station that's based in Melbourne. It's called JM, right? I'm in London and I do these reviews, and a friend of mine called Jordan Brown, it's not his real name, his name is Cristiano, and he's from Perugia in Italy. He's an amazing musician. He produces it for me out of Gillingham in Kent, which is kind of southeast London. And he sends it into a Dropbox from London, and it pops in 9 o'clock Sunday morning here in Melbourne. And the only people who listen to the people in Melbourne and people in London. But for me, it's a fantastic opportunity to go and see as many different shows as I like, and that's it, and review them. That's the whole point of it.
And do you enjoy that?
I do, because it actually gives me good reason to get on the phone and do interviews with people like Mike Garson, who, David Bowie's musical director. And in fact, if I can, I want to mention Mike, because there's a Bowie picture over there.
There is.
Mike Garson, since I was a small star, was a huge musical inspiration. I can remember Lady Grinning Soul by David Bowie, and particularly the jazz piano solo in the middle of Aladdin Sane. They were talking Bowie early 70s. So Mike Garson was Bowie's driving force and musical director for 50 years.
Okay.
I've always been a fan of Bowie, and I've always been a fan of Mike Garson. And I discovered a whole other side to Mike Garson, and we exchanged. He is a huge fan of things like Ligeti and Scriabin. Now, most people know Mike as being this wild, outrageous musical director for David Bowie. There is another side to him that's even wilder, and I mean really wild.
Whoa.
So we have this whole thing going of exchanging music stuff that we like across the way that's really only for us, that no one else needs to know about, but it's wild. I landed in New York, and I've done quite a lot of shows, obviously, New York as well, but and when we were doing The Happy Hooker, and I wasn't involved in the casting of it. I was in London at the time, and there was a lot of toing and froing, one thing and the other. Anyway, I get there, and Mike Garson is my musical director, and I'm the composer of the piece. I couldn't believe it. It's a double whammy. I'm over in New York, which is a nice place to do world premiere of a new musical anyway. But to have Mike Garson as your musical director on the show, fantastic.
All right, because you've mentioned it, Happy Hooker, what is it? Opened in New York? Tell us about it.
I'll tell you exactly. Okay. When I was about 23 years old, I used to do the commute, for some strange reason, a lot to Amsterdam. And it started out because a band I was with, we used to do places like De Melkweg and Café Alto in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
But then after that, I was picked up, and I say picked up, it's like an old-fashioned benefactor or patron, a guy called Albert Van Dam took me under his wing. For anyone who's interested, do Google search him. Albert Van Dam was best friends with Salvador Dali.
Whoa.
He was an inventor. He was a painter.
Yeah.
He was also great friends with Freddie Heineken, who was the richest man in Holland at the time. He had original Salvador Dali's as gifts all over the place.
Gosh.
Aluminium cans. Any idea how many are produced in the world every day? He invented the machine. He has the patent on it. Billions, right?
Whoa.
What happened was I was with an Israeli animator named Oshri Evan Zohar, okay? And he was working with a band called Killing Joke. Ever?
Yes.
We're talking early 80s.
Yeah.
Here. And a lot of the English bands would record not so much in Amsterdam, but around Amsterdam. And Oshri said to me one day, he said, "Oh, I just got a phone call from Xavier Hollander." I said, "Who's that?" He said, "Don't worry, you find it interesting. We've been invited over for breakfast." I thought, "Oh, fair enough, let's go along." So we went off to Stadienweg, where she lived in Amsterdam. Here am I thinking rather naively, as a 23-year-old, we're going to go and see Xavier Hollander. We'll have some bacon and eggs, which, okay, it's not much for a Jewish boy, but it's going to be a lot of fun. You can imagine, it's the full 9 yards. There were orgies going on. It was wild. During the course of it, she said, "Oh, I understand you play the piano. Do you want to play something?" So, sure, why not? It was like a mini Bloomsbury set going on there. So I played something, and this guy kind of sidles up to me. It was Albert Van Dam. And he said, "You've heard about all the sex parties that happened in Amsterdam during the 60s, Fondle Park and all this. It all happened in his home, right? He was the epicenter of it."
Wow.
Wild character. He said, "Warren, I'm going to book a Blue Note studio in Munster, which is near The Hague. I'm going to book it next week. I'm going to send you tickets. I'll be at Terminal 4 at Heathrow." And I go, yeah. And he did all that. So I found myself spending a lot of time in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Recordings, one thing, that. Anyway, so I then got to know Xavier Hollander quite well. I then have to fast forward 20 years. I'm now living in Spain, doing the commute from London to Spain, and the name, who I haven't heard of for 20 years, pops up, Xavier Hollander. I said, "Well, what's she got to do with anything?" "Oh, she lives in Marbella. She commutes between Marbella, which was right near where I was in southern Spain, and Amsterdam. She does the commute." I said, "Well, that's interesting." Anyway, so I caught up with her, and it's out. "Oh, what are you doing, Xavier?" "I'm an entrepreneur. I produce acts for the Edinburgh Festival." I said, "You're kidding me, really?" Now, you've got to put this in perspective. This woman, for people who don't know who she was, let's get real here. The happy hook of the book when it came out was the Harry Potter of its day. It was the biggest selling book on the planet.
That's right.
Okay, she got deported after the Knapp trials on corruption pre-Watergate. And they couldn't have her around for the Watergate trials because she would have brought both sides down. She started this phenomenon of bugging. There's a character in her book called Abe the Bugger, and it's not the bugger you might be thinking of. It was the whole phenomenon of bugging. She caught it, and she caught a guy called Robin Moore. She said, "What are you doing in the bugging?" He had just finished writing 2 books that you might be familiar with. One called The French Connection, turned into a film.
I think I've heard of it.
And the other, The Green Berets.
Right.
Okay. So in her book, Yvonne Dunleavy is down as one of the ghostwriters, Robert Moore and Xavier Hollander. She was the source. Believe me, she didn't put pen to page. Nonetheless, I shouldn't say, if you're watching, lots of love. No, listen, she's a fantastic force, and it was all down to her work. But the thing to be said about it is this. It was such a big story at the time. You had the NYPD corruption, you had nude demonstrations on the White Horse Lawn, you had the Vietnam thing, you had all the bugging leading up to the Watergate thing. Now, her clients included Alfred Hitchcock, Danny Gay, the Bloomingdale brothers, Sterling Moss, on and on and on.
Whoa.
But loads of politicians, and she would have seriously brought both sides down in Watergate, so they couldn't have her in the country. So they deported her on a charge called moral turpitude. It's an old 200-year charge.
Okay, that's a real charge.
It's a real charge.
Oh,
Listen,
wow.
People who are up on double murder raps go away for 30 years. Moral turpitude. She has trouble getting in today. I mean, she can't get in. She was seen as such a threat to national security, the whole thing. But being a very savvy operator as she was, to coincide with her deportation from JFK, there she was holding up the happy hook of the book to coincide with her deportation. It went on to be a huge book. So I said to Sophia, I'm all very well about, you producing, shows at the Edinburgh Festival. I said, who's doing a musical about you? She said, what do you mean? I said, Xavier, people who lived through that period in America, through you, They can't get over it today. They can't believe they lived through that period. Stonewall, women's rights, burning of bras, it was such an incredible transformational period in history. So I got her before a lawyer of mine in London, a Drury Lane lawyer. We got her to put pen to paper. We got a writer on board. And I can remember going out to Marbella with my son. It was hysterical. And I'd sit there. We'd do 8 hours of interviews with her at a time. And he would come away saying, Dad, is a hooker some kind of athlete? I'd say, you could say that, yeah, some kind of athlete. Yeah, that's about right. It was a most amazing stories, one after another. She is a tour de force. I mean, I've got to say, in addition through my life of having unusual experiences, as I say, working in Riyadh in these places, and also having the great thrill of working with some of the most celebrated and lauded writers in the world, it's quite funny that the two, I think, probably most famous pieces of eye candy, and they won't mind me saying this because they're great girls, certainly the 20th century, Xaviera Holden and then Pamela Anderson, to do projects kind of with both. It's sort of quite funny and quite ironic. But so we then piled off to New York, where everybody wanted to get a piece of this whole happy hooker thing. And I've got to tell you, like 50% of the projects I do, they end up in some kind of trouble in terms of litigation. 50%. I wish it was 10%, but it's not. It's 50%.
And do you like that? Do you like the thrill of it?
I wish I didn't have to tell you this, because I wish I was lying or even taking artistic license, which I am known to do. I would say I have more conversations with lawyers during the normal course of a week than I do with creatives.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the nature of the business.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back. And that photo over your shoulder, you're at a piano with the Bowie. Yep. The Bowie, that famous Aladdin scene. You mentioned it. What was that show about, Chapel off Chapel?
I really fancy doing something that could honour the whole legacy of David Bowie and Freddie Mercury. David Bowie, as I say, it was 1 degree of separation for me because of Mike Garcia, and Freddie Mercury is quite interesting as well because, first of all, I've worked a lot with Brian May's wife, Anita Dobson, now Anita May, who you might remember from the EastEnders, was the original barmaid.
That's right, yep.
I've done so many shows, blessed with Anita, who's a great tour de force in her own right. In fact, I've got to share something with you.
Yeah.
One of the funniest things, and I better put it nicely in case Anita sees this. I did a show with Anita, and we were at the Wimbledon Theatre, and she was on stage singing "It's a Kind of Magic," which is one of Queen's songs. Sitting next to me is her doting husband, Brian May. Both of them have the matching King Charles II haircuts, right? He's sitting there looking doughy-eyed at his wife, and I'm thinking, this is great. Love is tone deaf beyond other things, because bless her, she's a fantastic actress. She's a good singer. She's a strong singer. She's certainly not the world's best singer. They're an amazing couple. She's an amazing woman. And I also had the great pleasure of being Peter Straker's musical director for 20 years. Peter was Freddie Mercury's boyfriend for the last 5 years of Freddie's life. Straker is an incredible performer, and I would say one of the best exponents of Jacques Brel and Sammy Davis in the world. Okay. And I'd done numerous shows with Straker, outrageous. So I kind of felt, and I never met Freddie Mercury, and I never met David Bowie. Freddie Mercury died within 2 years of my arrival in London, and to be honest with you, with the David Bowie situation, it was only when I arrived in New York with Mike Garcia was the only time I ever had that degree of connection. So I thought, wow, these are people, both Freddie Mercury and Bowie, they didn't really write songs. What they were writing was so much bigger than songs. They wrote hymns for a generation.
Oh, okay. I wondered where you were going there.
Well, no. I mean, you look at the kind of material that both of them wrote.
Absolutely.
They're so much bigger than writing a song. It was something that it defines all of us in a very soul-stirring way. The stuff about space, polarization, isolation, being alone, magic that Bowie wrote about is so much bigger than most songs. The kind of things that we know that Freddie wrote about, they were anthems. You've only got to look at Live Aid the first time. Yeah, he walked off with it.
Exactly. But the wonderful thing is, it's generation after generation love the music. You know, like people are growing up with hearing it, their parents, but then they love it as well, and it keeps on going.
Absolutely.
Timeless. It's music that's timeless. Both
Absolutely.
Of them. Yeah.
I mean, as I say, I can remember being very young the first time I heard both Aladdin Sane and Lady Grinning Soul. It was mind-blowing. But I can also remember the first time I heard some of the complex harmonies from Sheer Heart Attack, I think it was, by Queen.
Yep.
Love of my life. It's just, wow.
Yeah.
And I thought a great disservice was done to Queen in the film that got all the accolades and got the best actor, because it kind of skipped over the fact, because I understand we're very interested in titillation and all the rest of it when we see a film. Freddie Mercury, what he achieved musically is mind-blowing. Apart from Queen, it's certainly only the Beach Boys, in a pop sense, ever did that amount of detail and intricacy when it came to arrangements and vocals. That kind of was ignored in the film.
I agree. I loved it because I was a big Queen fan and Freddie fan. But I think the rest of the band interfered too much, and there was a lot of talk. And they were making sure that they were being, looked at in the right light. And they didn't do enough. And I agree totally. Freddie, they should have done more about Freddie.
It was interesting as well. Sacha Baron Cohen, who was offered it originally, and looked at the script and said, "No."
Yeah.
So which was interesting in itself.
All right. Well, hold on. We've gone off. You're like, when you change the subject. The show at Chapel of Chapel.
As the female tiger once said, I tigress. Okay. Okay.
Oh, I love going off.
Tangential.
Tell us about that show at Chapel of Chapel.
Okay, so
because I didn't see it, but I heard so much about it.
I had a great relationship with Chapel of Chapel as a result of doing things like Genesis to Broadway there, which was a delight.
Yep.
And love the space. And in Melbourne, listen, I love to come here and see my family, but it's nice to sort of come and get your feet dirty with something. So I came and said to them, let's do something there. And I thought, let's do a thing where we honour Bowie and Freddie. I got a fantastic singer called Tando, who I believe is quite sort of prominent around the traps here.
Yep.
The lovely Jess Mortlock over there, who's a gorgeous dancer, and Jason Bavard, who I believe is going to be here doing his magic with his lights. I got to say, the lights were stunning. It was great. And I had a ball. Listen, we were only there for 3 weeks or something. And it's something, one of the things about where you go from project to project to project, and I admire people like Andrew Lloyd Webber, not because he's the greatest composer. He is so good at capitalising on his own brand. Whether it comes down to keeping an eye on the posters or making sure that this happens, it's about maximum exploitation. I find as a hired gun to a certain extent, once I've finished the project, right, I'm into the next project. What I should do, I suppose, is, right, let's see if we can tour this over here and do this. What's the maximum way of capitalising on it? And it's not really something that kind of comes into my orbit. You
should maybe have somebody working closely with you, a manager.
Do you know what? As I say, I've been through all of this. It always ends up with the lawyers, I find.
All right. I'm going to change the topic a little bit, because this is a beautiful project, and a lot of people don't know about it. Right. The Night of Broken Glass. What is it? Well,
I need to give you a bit of history background to this one.
Of course you do. You have with everything. Come on.
Okay. In North London, there is a borough called Haringey.
Right.
And it's mainly known for the fact that the Tottenham football ground, Tottenham Hotspur, come on you Spurs, I'm a fan, is based there, okay?
Right.
It is a very underprivileged financially borough, and also is made up of 200 ethnic minorities, 200 languages are spoken in Haringey, making it not only the most culturally diverse borough in Great Britain, but in Europe. Now, it doesn't always work seamlessly. There is a lot of gang
I could imagine.
conflict, trouble. So one day I got the smart idea in my head, I thought at the time, wouldn't it be nice, being that we are in somewhat of a gifted position being musicians, to put something back whereby that we do something that is not purely a commercial project. So I like to think I wear two hats today. One is a commercial and one is what I call a good causes hat or a community hat. Now, I happened to be having a conversation when a woman, and if she, I've got to send this to Kate Annette. Kate Annette founded Haringey Shed, okay? She was the administrator. She was a driving force. I adore, Kate, if you're watching, hello. But the reason I say this, I got to spend more time proofreading. On the London Beat thing, it got out that I'd created Haringey Shed, and that's not true. I never did. What I came up with which I'm very proud of, is a module, is a template, is a block for how the idea of socially inclusive music theatre could work. How you can collaboratively do with people who are not trained from musical backgrounds, world premieres of new musicals that actually stand up to being scrutinised and examined at that level. Not only that we had the template for the company. A third of the company was what I would call mainstream kids. A third of the company were what I would call at-need kids, at-risk kids. What do I mean by that? From traumatised backgrounds, criminal backgrounds, domestic abuse. And a third of the company, what I call, if you like, special needs kids. Autism, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, and so on, deafness and so on. Okay. So we had children's theatre and youth theatre. Now my involvement, Kate was with it all year round, and she was a tour de force and a real driving force, and I adore her. My involvement really was in the summer, was to oversee this idea as how you go about putting on a world premiere of a new musical from nothing with a company, and you're going to do it in 3 weeks. They are going to write it, they're going to act in it, perform it, and we're going to bring in, for the production values, creme de la creme. We brought in Kathy Tyson, we brought in Susie McCann, we brought in top people in order to do the lighting, to do the sound, the design, etc., yeah? But basically, we had this incredibly diverse company, a socially inclusive company, of children's theatre and youth theatre in 3 weeks, putting on world premieres of new musicals that we did in West End venues, yeah? It was sensational. We did it in Haringey for quite a while. We then went to do it in Hackney Village. We then did it in Hong Kong. I was then rung up by Troupe University. We went and did it in Shepparton. Shepparton is where the story gets interesting from your question viewpoint. When I was in Shepparton, I came out with a drama practitioner from the UK. His name is Yamin Chowdhury. Anyone should have a look at him. His mother came to me. She said, what can I do with my boy? He's a son. He's constantly getting into trouble and fights. He's a Bangladeshi Muslim living in London. You can't say Bangladeshi Muslim today. It's BAMA, Black Asian Minority Ethnic. And don't ask me that the parlance on the streets in Britain changes every day. If you want to talk about woke, go to London. Every week it changes. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, so what happened was, she said, please, can you do something with my son, Yamin? Sure, I took him under my wing, and he became an incredible drama practitioner, lighting and sound technician, a huge force for good. So much so that about 3 years ago, one of the best directing jobs came up, and that was the artistic director of the Hackney Empire. Yamin's got the job.
Wow.
So if anyone has any doubts about the quality and the effectiveness, the impact and transformational value of this work, Yamin is the guy to have a look at. It transformed his life completely. When he and I came to Shepparton, all we knew is that under the auspice of La Trobe University, we were going to work with kids because it was suggested to us that Shepparton had the highest illiteracy and innumeracy rate in Australia.
Okay.
And they said, can you try and weave your magic here and do something to at least bring the kids together? Yeah, sure we can. So off we go. Now, there's a photo there behind you, and that's me with a whole bunch of our Congolese kids in Shepparton, and they were amazing. They had come from the most traumatised, Mike, believe me, back there, limbs being lopped off, you can imagine. They were the most amazing kids, and they were amazing in the group. This is in Shepparton, where I'm the token white face, and being token, when I did with Margaret Atwood at the Royal Shakespeare Company, Penelope, I was the token male. When I do my stuff in the Middle East, I am the token non-Muslim. So I'm very used. In fact, I used to do a thing which I call Dead Black American shows. The whole cast would come out, the whole band would be there, and it'd be me, and I'd be the token white in it. So I have no problem with being the odd one out. That doesn't worry me at all. So what happened was, Yamin was actually looking for a theme for us to develop, okay? So we do, well, what can we do this piece about? This is in 2012. We came across a name from the area called William Cooper. And I've got to put my hand up. For someone who went to school here, I'd never heard of this man, an Aboriginal man. And he became the leader of the Aboriginal Advancement League for all kinds of human rights things and equal opportunities in work, etc. I'd never heard of him. And we then met his grandson, who is still alive. He's 93. He's a Yorsa man. His name is Uncle Boydie, and he still lives in Shepparton.
Right.
I can tell you the story because it's worth knowing. But I then became very active with Uncle Boydie to acknowledge something that his grandfather did. And this leads us to Night of Broken Glass. We did this piece called Shep Shed. And it was called Shep Shed was the name of the organisation under La Trobe University. Yep. Our ambassador was Pamela Anderson. Whoa. So what used to happen during the evening when we finished, we'd go and have a live Skype, pre-Zoom of course, we would have a Skype link up to Malibu, and Pam would be there answering questions for our kids. Now, you might say, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
The point of it is you want to get kids motivated and engaged. When we did it in London, we found the best way to get the parents engaged was to put role models on. Now, because we had a lot of Caribbean parents, who were from a lower socioeconomic background, we would have people like Sharon D. Clark, Clive Rowe, Danny John Jules, Red Wolf. They would be our guests in the show, so the parents would love to come along. And if you get the parents, they want their kids to participate.
Yep.
Well, I thought if we get Pamela to come on board as our sort of ambassador for the cause, we're going to get a little bit of press, I think, happening in Shepparton. We did, big time. And of course, all the kids were happy with that, the parents were happy with that, etc. So what happened? We discovered the story of William Cooper. Who is William Cooper? What did he do? How does this lead up to your question about Night of Broken Glass? On November 9th and 10th, 1938, Hitler unleashed his forces on what was called Kristallnacht, where in Germany, Jewish properties, Jews themselves, were burned, tortured, harassed, killed, etc. And this was a precursor to the Holocaust. Okay, nobody in the world actually did an awful lot about it. A man here, 6 weeks later, an elderly man, an Aboriginal man, who was 78 years old, was reading the Argus newspaper in Melbourne. He himself, a victim to the most appalling atrocities and brutality that you can imagine as an Aboriginal at that time, was reading about this mob, as he calls them, these Jewish fellas and these Jewish people, and he was incensed, and he said, "Do you know what? I'm going to make a private citizen protest to the German government, to the embassy in Collins Street here, demanding the immediate cessation of hostilities against the Jewish people." He then managed to get together his Aboriginal Advancement League. They did a march on December the 6th, 1938.
Whoa.
He marched as a 78-year-old with his cohort. They went from Footscray to the gates of the German embassy in Collins Street, where he was promptly rejected. Fast forward 80 years, December 6th, 2 years ago. Is that right? 2 years ago? I'm in a COVID fog at the moment.
We all are.
2 years ago. It wasn't 2 years ago. Angela Merkel recognised the petition by William Cooper, apologised for it.
Wow.
This is a big story for Angela Merkel, belatedly 80 years to the day on December the 6th, came out and formally accepted all the recommendations made by William Cooper. Now, this partly happened because of people like my own involvement. We were doing fundraisers to make sure that Uncle Boydie could go and see the German government. He went and met with Prince William at Buckingham Palace. He went to Beersheba, where Aboriginals fought in the fall of the Light Brigade, the First World War. He's 93, he's not doing it now, but he stopped about 2 years ago. He was incredibly active to promote his grandfather's cause. We were all very determined that the story of William Cooper must get out on a worldwide basis, must be known in Australia, must get into the Australian curriculum. I mean, I put my hand up in shame. When I left school here in Australia, I could tell you who Yvonne Goolagong was. I couldn't tell you about an awful lot of other historic Aboriginal figures, much to my shame. And today, we're doing Night of Broken Glass again. We've got people like Jack Charles on board, who's a fabulous actor and quite an activist and quite a storyteller in his own right, and quite a novelist. People who I'm indebted to for their input, like Lois Peeler, who is one of the original Sapphires, who now has the only Aboriginal girls' school in Australia in Hillsville called Warrawa. But Night of Broken Glass, we then did to coincide with the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht 2018, and we did it at the Australian Catholic University. We had 400 people involved. We had kids, preschoolers, Holocaust survivors. We had Indians, Sikhs, Aboriginals, Muslims, musicians, you name it, we had it. So much so, the Hindu temple of West Melbourne on the night of the show came along and made 400 meals for everyone who was involved in the show, free. We did 2 audiences of 1,000 people. It was fantastic. I was then, funnily enough, here while I was sitting around in lockdown, wondering, please, how much longer captivity? Let me out. Got a call here from Mick Petroli from here, the Alex. He said, do you want to do something with your... Anyway, long and short was we decided we wanted to do Night of Broken Glass. We managed to get a fantastic team together, and a huge thank you here to Alan at the Alex Theatre and a few other organisations like Amar and Margaret. We have the most fantastic team of people. We have tried 3 times to get this thing on, including a Zoom online. It'll happen next year. It's bigger and better than the previous one because this time, one of the unwitting takeaways from the pandemic that is positive is you no longer have to be in a live room with performers to enjoy a performance. Zoom has meant people from all over the world now can participate. Now, this is one of the few positive takeaways, I think, from the pandemic, but it means also we have participation from Spain, and the Spanish government are now involved, because I used to work a lot with Antonio Torres. He is involved with the project. We have a Lebanese, Egyptian and Jordanian choir who are on board this time. We have a British contingent led by John Farndon, who's the Royal Literary Fellow of Britain. So we will get this piece on. We have been scuppered and brought to our knees 3 times through to the virus, but we are resilient people and we will rebound.
Right, so what's your plan for it? How will people see it? Will it be like on television or Netflix, or how are people going to see it?
When we do it next time, first of all, it's certainly going to go out on Zoom worldwide. Yeah?
Right.
And it'll certainly be up on YouTube. And we certainly this time, well, I've got a huge thank you to Michael Pierce, who's the consular here, the Consul General for the German Embassy, and we are dealing with some of the German Embassy in Canberra. We've got great support all around. Arnold Bloch-Lieber are one of our funders now. We're being auspiced. Things have moved on quite a bit from when we did 2018. We are hoping to do live performances right here at the Alex Theatre.
Brilliant.
We also had a relationship, dare I say it, with the State Theatre, who obviously, again, has gone by the wayside this year. So we will rebound. It won't be this year. It's not a chance in hell it's going to happen this year. It'll happen next year. But yes, it'll be bigger and better, and it'll be on a global scale this time, which we didn't have that opportunity when we did ACU Cathedral Hall 2018.
Yeah. Warren, that is the most amazing story. That is, like, I was filling up. I was getting very emotional when you were telling me. Congratulations. That is incredible.
I'm going to get you a bit more emotional.
Right.
I'm a big champion that, listen, if you work with professional people, that's great. But if you've got to work with the community, I mean, let's really work with the community.
Yep.
Homeless people, people who are victims of domestic violence, all the rest of it. I'm thrilled to say, and it's the first time I've had this opportunity, when I did this in London, and we had so many different kinds of special needs kids, but this time is the first time that I've had such a cohort of blind people, and they're from Blind Sports Victoria. Shout out to Morris and Phoebe and Gigi, and they have been fantastic. Not only have they been fantastic, the whole attitude of our younger people in terms of interacting and helping, it makes so inclusive in all the right ways. We hear so much nonsense about, well, it's got to be diverse and socially inclusive because it ticks boxes. Let me tell you, when you're actually in a room, forget all the nonsense and philosophizing about, actually do it. Get your hands dirty doing it.
Yep.
To see it successfully in action is a joy. That is happening next year, and there's also a company I'm working with. About 4 years ago, I was asked by Choir of Hard Knocks to do a show here with Choir of Hard Knocks. It happened at the same time of working with a group that Mark Holden had called Men Aloud, and it was men who feel a little bit sidelined by the Me Too campaign, and they were men with post-traumatic stress disorder, testicular cancer, psychological orders, who also felt, they needed help. Putting it bluntly, and we did a musical with them. I did a musical with Choir of Hard Knocks, and off the back of it, a new company was formed called Upbeat Arts. One of the things that I'm doing with Upbeat Arts next year is about a particular very bad takeaway of the pandemic, and that is the amount of women who have had to rehouse themselves because they have been battered by partners as a result of domestic violence. It has not received a lot of publicity because I think people are afraid of copycat incidents, and because it's apparently it's huge.
Yeah.
It's got out of control.
Yeah.
Cutting it short, the company who are doing it are well sourced to deal with women who have come from these circumstances, really unfortunate circumstances. I mean, I can imagine no one expects to be stuck with someone 24/7 who's then not working, who then has a drinking problem, who then decides they're going to talk with their fists. My God, if you're a woman, I mean, it must be shocking, absolutely shocking, terrifying. And of course, there are kids involved and all the rest of it. The other interesting thing that's come up with this group is they also have been quite instrumental, Upbeat Arts, in getting Afghan families over to Australia. So one of the projects next year that I'll be working with is called Home. And it's home in all the broad context of the word home, and that is from domestic violence to fleeing Afghanistan to set up a new home in Australia. Our last conversation was to ensure we will have Afghan translators involved in it. But yes, that's me wearing a very different hat to the first half of our conversation. Yeah.
My mind is, I feel as if I don't do enough in life after talking to you, and I'm a busy person. You're incredible. I want
the last 2 years back, though. I tell you, I feel shortchanged by this pandemic. I want the last 2 years back.
But look what you've done in the last couple of years. It hasn't stopped you at all, has it?
It hasn't been. Listen, I'm not complaining. Listen, whatever we say here in Australia, I keep telling people, compared to the rest of the world, in Australia, we've got away with a grazed knee. You look in Britain, the amount of deaths. We are a fraction. We're probably 1% of whatever it is. We have really got as much as the difficulties we've all had to endure, we've got away with a grazed knee.
Yeah. Warren, keep on doing what you're doing. You're like,
I'm compelled to.
you're compelled to. Thank you so much for chatting with
Great
us today.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching as well. I'm David Hunt and you've been watching The Art Hunter.